grew up in northern Holland, a tall, athletic boy in a serious, close-knit family, a determined, even overachieving student who loved machines and spent any free time sailing and learning another art. All of that was about to change. Willem Hamminga was 18 when Nazi tanks rolled across the Dutch border in May of 1940 and crushed all resistance in 5 days. The Dutch royal family fled to Britain, the Gestapo rounded up enemies, and Holland settled into occupation. But there were incidents. A German soldier found dead, officers' sidearms stolen in cafes, and soon Willem and 2 friends were planning their escape. They would sail 130 miles to England across the North Sea in the middle of winter. Hundreds of Dutchmen had tried. A quarter of them died in the attempt. The plan involved making the crossing in a boat so small that it could be hidden near the beach. But this attempt was never launched. The little boat was discovered. Then, in December, a break. A friend of a friend knew the captain of a 400-ton coaster, and the 3 young men were able to get work on the ship, which sometimes called in Swedish ports. Once in the safety of neutral Sweden, they scuttled the ship to render it useless to the Germans. They were briefly thrown in jail for having entered the country illegally. Then the intrigue began. Escapees from occupied countries had propaganda value, and the embassies of Germany and Britain began maneuvering. The British arranged a flight to freedom in the belly of one of these, an RAF Mosquito fighter bomber. But with Norway and Denmark now in German hands, the flight didn't head west toward Britain. It flew the 3 young escapees east to the Russian city of Veliki Luki. From there it was on to Moscow and south by train. Far south and back, on a series of trains that chugged through the Russian winter and south through Ukraine. Just weeks later, Hitler's panzers would smash deep into Russia. But now German agents on the train continued the diplomatic intrigue, trying to persuade the escapees to return to Holland and be treated as heroes, or so went the promises. From the Russian port of Odessa, they crossed the Black Sea. A few days later, they arrived in neutral Baghdad. Neutral, and a long way from the war. But the war was about to come to Iraq. Germany and Britain both wanted Iraq's oil. Baghdad had become a hotbed of conspiracies. The government was slightly pro-British, but weak, and the Germans had been busy. In April, a group of pro-Nazi army officers staged a coup and immediately opened talks for an alliance with Hitler. Germany moved quickly. Berlin flew in their best man. Fritz Grube specialized in destabilizing British regimes in the Middle East. He's almost certainly the senior Nazi diplomat who made a new offer to convince the 3 young Dutch escapees to reconsider their allegiances. They declined, and Fritz Grube ran out of time. British forces invaded and put a quick but violent end to the pro-Nazi regime. And the Dutchmen? Well, they were back on a train that wound its way through Iran and what is now Pakistan, bound for a more secure British base, India. They stayed there just long enough to board a ship that sailed southeast. That voyage took them to the other side of the world, around the Cape of Good Hope, and into the submarine-infested Atlantic, with stops in Rio, New York, and Halifax. The most dangerous part of the trip was about to begin.
Alarm! Ein feindlicher Geleitzug in Sicht!
For the German U-boat fleet, 1941 was known as the happy time. They were successfully strangling Britain's Atlantic lifeline from North America. In all of World War II, Winston Churchill said the only thing that ever frightened him was the U-boat peril. Having already sailed literally around the world, Willem was about to face the last and most lethal leg of the voyage. The convoy left Halifax with 34 ships, but the U-boats were waiting. Only 14 ships arrived in Liverpool, including his. On the 13th of October 1941, 9 months, 5 continents, 3 oceans, and 26,000 miles after leaving his home in Groningen, Willem was in London, about 300 miles from his starting point. He was personally decorated by Queen Wilhelmina with one of Holland's highest decorations, the Cross of Merit.
Het betonen van moed, initiatief en doorzettingsvermogen door na het vijandelijk koopvaardij.
Showing courage, initiative, and perseverance, the citation reads, and using their own ways and means with no help, they reached England via Moscow, Odessa, Bombay, and Cape Town, overcoming many obstacles and making great sacrifices.
Durende langere tijd grote opofferingen hebben getroost.
The medal went on a new Navy uniform. Willem was assigned to the Dutch submarine service. He spent 6 months on a Dutch sub, the O-10, a boat built in the 1920s. He was a cook, but after 6 months on the elderly boat, he asked for a change, and got it. The change required yet another voyage across the treacherous Atlantic, and it ended here, in the cockpit of a tiger moth, on a small airstrip on the Canadian prairie. In De Winton, Alberta, south of Calgary, the teenager who learned to float on the thermals was back at the controls to learn a very different kind of flying. He lifted off from this runway and practiced his landings and soloed after 5 hours. 4 years earlier, the schoolboy could touch down on the grass and bicycle home and tell his parents about soaring above the dunes in a glider. Now he couldn't even tell his parents he was alive, but he was back in the air. Thousands got their basic flight training here. Some washed out, and some didn't survive. Those who succeeded moved on to advanced training in Medicine Hat. Willem almost died there when another student pilot made a near-fatal error in an Avro Anson. But he earned his wings, and for a time, the young Dutch flyer had a fiancée in Calgary.